Hey guys, welcome to the Filipino American Ministry podcast. I'm your
Woohoo!
host, Henrik, and this is our co host, Aaron, and our guest, Neo. So I hope you enjoy. Our topic for today is going to be: Is it unbiblical to be a Filipino American church?
All right, welcome everybody. As your co-host, I'm going to be asking Henrik the first question. So, let's start with this first question. How do we define a Filipino American church?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, yeah, I think there's one main one, which is the church is predominantly Filipino American. The pastor is Filipino, from the Philippines, and then all of
From the
the
Philippines?
congregation.
Wait. So, you saying you can't have a. Does it have to be a Filipino from the Philippines?
Well, I'm just giving the majority Filipino
Ah, okay,
American
okay.
church. What does the main ones look like?
All right.
Yeah, and then so yeah, Filipino pastor from the Philippines, and then there probably has the word Filipino in their name, or Philippines in their name. So those are typical ones. The other ones are maybe less popular as a second generation Filipino American, and he's attracting other Filipino Americans in his congregation. Yeah, but basically, what we're talking about is a church that is mainly majority Filipino American. Do you have anything else to add, Aaron?
Yeah. Um, yeah, like I said, I think culturally it's you can tell it's Filipino or Filipino American, right? Like you go in there and just after the service, there's lumpia and pancit and
Yeah,
whatever like Filipino food. It's just structured in a way that's very Filipino. The way people relate to each other, the way people talk, um, the respect to like older people, you can kind of just see that when you go in there. And I
hmm
think also, other than that, it's the missiological focus, I guess. Like people are, the focus is on reaching out mostly to. I mean, I guess they don't really like outright say that they're focusing mainly on Filipinos, but because that's kind of like their circle of influence, that's who they reach out mainly to.
yeah. Naturally, they reach out to other Filipino American friends.
Yeah. All right, I guess it's a good time to switch to the next question. What does the Bible have to say about Filipino American churches?
Well, I think to start off, I think we need to look at what does the Bible say about ethnicity, and um, I think one thing we can say is that God is a God of culture. Like he has created many people groups in His image, and there are different culture groups, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I don't think our God is a God who doesn't like diversity or He doesn't like culture, but He does. He created all the different culture groups. He loves them all, and we can see that in the arc of um, the story of the gospel and how God has He chose Israel, but then He is reaching even Jew and Gentile, to bring them to Him. And in Revelations, we see all these nations, tribes, and tongues worshiping God together. So I think that's the first thing that we can say about Filipino American churches. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Um. Well, definitely, I think there is room for. I'm just trying to think about this question. What does the Bible have to say about Filipino American churches? I don't know if there is a specific thing that it says about Filipino American churches. Maybe I think a more appropriate question is like, is there room for Filipino American churches? And I would definitely say yes to that. I think there is room for immigrant churches in general. I think that like even in the Bible, you see that um, God pursues specific people groups. Um, like Jonah to the people of Nineveh, or Paul to the Gentiles. Um, it's not that we're leaving out the majority or the other cultures. It's just that it's one way to reach all the nations. Sometimes God sends us to a specific people group. So I think that's probably the role of some. I mean, that's probably the role of immigrant churches in general. So like Filipino Americans are best equipped to reach out to Filipino Americans, and so it's not that we're trying to ignore other cultures. I mean, not really. It's just that if you really think about it, it's kind of uh, wiser actually to um, have Filipino Americans or a specific culture reach out to the same culture. It's just a lot easier that way, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that you're thinking of like practically speaking, it's easier for Filipino Americans to reach out to other Filipino Americans.
Yeah, that's true. But also, like, even like just looking in the Bible, I mean, God does have a heart for specific people groups, right? And again, not taking away from our call to reach all the nations, right? I think I mean that's a calling that we should try to fulfill, right? To reach all the nations. Um, but the way that I see it is, it's not in contrast against like targeting a specific people group. I'm looking at targeting a specific people group as a means to target all nations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds like Epic. Have you heard of Epic?
I think so. I've heard a little bit about them. Yeah, we went to their conference.
Yeah, Epic. I remember hearing their vision is they're an ethnic, not ethnic, but their focus is on Asian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But when they in their vision, what their goal is they're trying to reach the world through Asian Americans. So I thought that was, yeah, that's in line with what you said.
Yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, I'm not like even if you think about like uh, strategy and reaching out, um, the unreached, right? It's not like you don't say, "Oh, I'm gonna go out and reach like everybody." It's just like a silly strategy. It just doesn't work, right? Like usually, you pick a people group, you pray about it, you learn the language, you learn the culture, and and you start with that, and that it doesn't make sense to be so broad. I think it's kind of like it's not effective, basically.
Yeah, you're talking about missions, right? Like if you
Yeah,
go
yeah,
to
yeah. Like
a
in the
different
context of
country.
missions. So like in the same way, there is a gap, that the majority Christian culture where they can't reach Filipinos or Filipino Americans just because they don't. It's not their circle of influence. They don't understand the culture, or maybe there's the language. Even the Filipinos speak English. Sometimes Filipinos, especially first generation, they're kind of shy to speak English. Uh, they say nosebleed, nosebleed. Like, I don't
Yeah,
understand. I don't want to speak English.
there's a classic example in my church where someone was coming from work. She came to a Bible study, and then there were people there who didn't speak Tagalog. And then what happened was they said, "Oh, you guys can't speak Tagalog. You guys have to speak English because there's a non-Tagalog speaker here." And then she said, "Oh, I'm so tired of speaking English," because she spoke English all day
I
at
think
her
I know
work.
who that is.
Yeah. So yeah, even though Filipinos speak English or they're good at it, that doesn't mean that they're comfortable speaking it all the time, or that it's not their preference of it's not their heart language, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have to kind of adjust somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's the value of Filipino American churches, because they allow people to communicate in their heart language, like their struggles and their concerns, and they can talk to someone and hear, um, like feel the love of God through people in their culture. So I think that's another value of Filipino American churches.
Hmm. So, do you think there are benefits or advantages of, being a Filipino American church
Their
or
advantages,
ethnic church in general? Like, what advantages are there to being an ethnic church, specifically Filipino American church?
yeah. So I think, yeah, kind of like what you said. Like it has a missional advantage where you can reach certain people that you wouldn't be able to reach. Um, like in my region, there are a lot of Filipino Americans that are immigrating here,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them actually my church grew a lot because um, they were people who were visiting our church because they saw us online. They were looking for a Filipino church, and um, yeah, they were looking specifically for a Filipino church. A lot of our members, we asked them, how did you who invited you here? And they said, oh, I was looking for a Filipino church. And sometimes it's because they're looking for Filipino community because they're immigrants. And I think even for me, when I go to a region of the country, I try to visit Filipino American churches. Um, yeah, it's not that I don't like like a majority
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
culture or multi-ethnic churches, but I'm also like curious to see when I visit other states. Like I'm curious to look at. I feel at home in some way when I go to Filipino American churches.
Yeah. No, I think. I think you're right about that. Definitely, for me and my family, when we moved to the states, the first thing we tried to look for was a Filipino church. It's the first place where we can find community. People that where you were. It's a new land. It's a strange land where we're not sure how things work, and so just being in a Filipino church, kind of comfortable, right? Like that's where I found my first friends, first deep community, um, where I can eat Filipino food. So like it's a place of comfort, um, and I think that's you sort of mentioned it already, but that is an advantage because uh, I think Asian immigration in general, it's not like it's slowing down or anything like that. It's actually like increasing every year. And so when you have immigrants come to the US, a lot of them might not be Christians. A lot of them might just be looking for a place where they can find community or even a job, right? Like job opportunity if they can talk to somebody who knows somebody, or like a place to live, right? Like somebody who knows somebody. That's just how it works in our culture. And so that kind of presents an opportunity to be able to share the gospel to them, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up because actually I have some statistics. Um, yeah, I got some of these statistics from Together for the Gospel Talk. It says in 2012 there was 18.9 million Asian Americans, and it's expected to double by 2050. And they say that it's expected that 10% of the U.S. will be Asian American by 2050. And on top of that, Asian American growth rate is estimated to exceed all other ethnic racial groups in America. So there is
Wow.
definitely a lot of Asian Americans coming to America, and so yeah, like you said, there's a strategic purpose for um, Filipino American churches or Asian American churches in general to minister to these immigrants who are coming here.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's switch a little bit and talk about what about like disadvantages.
Yeah, disadvantages. I think the main disadvantage why immigrant churches are criticized is because they seem to be like a cultural bubble where they're not really reaching out to their community. If it's like a Filipino American church, a lot of criticism that happened in my church is Like we are located in a city, but we're not really interacting with our community. We just interact with each other Filipinos in the community, but not interacting with non-Filipinos. And we also have non-Filipino coworkers, friends. And how do we, like, how is our church going to minister to them? Because when we, like, I had this issue when I was young. I had a Chinese friend, and I invited him to my church, and I also invited his family to my church, but there was like a cultural gap, and it felt awkward for when I visited or when they visited.
Hmm.
So ever since that experience, I've always been having a hard time inviting my friends to my church. I usually like try to share the gospel with them and then encourage them to go to a church that I know of. So that's a whole nother issue. Um,
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think like because it's so monocultural, it's easy for like others outside of the culture to feel out of place.
yeah, yeah. Especially if you're a visitor and you're not Filipino and you're at that church, you're gonna feel like, oh, I don't belong here.
Hello, everybody. We got a guest here. We're talking about Filipino American churches. We were sort of talking about this subject last time we were talking, so I thought it'd be great to bring you
Yeah,
here. And
cool.
yeah, so we were just talking about the advantages and disadvantages of ethnic churches,
Okay,
specifically, I guess like Filipino American church, since that's kind of the context that we grew up in.
okay.
You know, so so yeah, any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, I always have thoughts. Uh, I think I don't know. I think we talked about it last time, right? Like, yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages. You said you gain something, but you also lose something when you become like a multi-ethnic church.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I get that, but
Let me put the context so Henrik understands.
mhm.
So we were talking about this church that was a language church but is trying to become multicultural, and so they're losing the language church aspect of it. They're gaining something like becoming more multicultural. I think we're talking about this, right? Like the danger of the disadvantage of a language church is that it's monocultural, that when someone from majority culture comes in, they feel out of place, right? So in a way, like, right, when the language church becomes a multicultural church, they open up more to the community around them. So that's kind of like what they gain, but what they lose is the advantage that we're talking about, that, like, you know the immigration in the US of Asians in general is not going down, it's actually rising up. And like I was telling in my story, that like the first place I go to find community is the Filipino church. That's where I try to find people I can be comfortable with, I can speak my language, I can eat Filipino food, I can find a job, I can find a place to live in, because just because maybe my cousin knows somebody there whose uncle owns something, and that's just kind of like how it works in the Asian American context, I guess, or in the Filipino American context. So anyways, that's kind of the context. I was telling Neo that, like, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's, you lose something in the sense of that advantage of being an ethnic church, right? You gain something of being a multicultural, but I guess it's like a trade-off, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think you know, with multicultural churches, like I just I just see the church, if it's if the language is understood by everybody, that's just my thing is like it just happens. Like the multicultural aspect of the preaching of the gospel, if it's understood in a language, it just culture just multicultural stuff just happens. Like there will be different people, like different ethnicities, and just uh, God calls, all these people who speak the same language. I think that's what I was. Those are like where my thoughts are dwelling because I don't think that churches need to be ethnocentric. Even though there's a cultural, uh, you know, factor to life, especially as an immigrant, I get that. Like when you were saying, what did we do when we got here? We Googled Filipino church. I understand that, right? For the immigrant, right? America is just it's interesting. It's all immigrants, but if we all like if we all grew up here for the people who grew up here and speak English and are in understanding the language in that way, the church just it just happens. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, what do
it
you mean by the church? It just happens. What just happens?
like whether or not you're actively seeking out um, ethnic diversity, it seems like if you just faithfully preach the gospel uh, in common grace, that might just happen. Whether or not you're actively like making a thing for it, I don't know if that makes sense.
So you're
Yeah,
saying
there's
that.
a.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I know a church that yeah that happened where the it's a Presbyterian church, and the pastor, he said, we're not trying to be multi-ethnic, we just preach the gospel,
And it just
um,
happens.
and then he also ministers to his current congregation, whoever's there. Like if they're Asian, he just caters his sermon to those Asians because he's Asian. But then if there are non-Asians, he also keeps that in mind, and he preaches the gospel in a way that ministers to those people. So he gets to know his congregation, and then somehow over time his church became multi-ethnic. So yeah, but I think or Aaron, were you going to say something?
No.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think that can happen, but I think there's also like culture is not just language. I mean, I think there are still like cultural ways of worshiping God. So I think, for example, if it's a Filipino church and they just focus on preaching the gospel faithfully, I don't think that they're. I don't think they might not naturally become multi-ethnic because um, their cultural expression of being Christians. I think they'll be able to minister to other Filipino Americans, and their message will be like it's going to be the same gospel. It's going to be faithful, but it's going to be focused more on a different aspect that resonates better with Filipinos. For example, shame. Like other cultures, they focus on guilt, and so they're more when they hear the gospel in the with a guilt lens, basically talking about how Jesus died to take away your guilt. Then, um, yeah, that's different than from a pastor who's talking about God has died to take away your shame. So I think they can still be faithful, but I think that um, they will still. It's still possible to attract only a certain type of ethnicity because of their because of the way that the pastor's contextualizing the gospel for his congregation.
Yeah, it might also help if we sort of define
It's always good to
define what it is that makes what is a Filipino American church. Are there examples in the Bible or times in the Bible where we see a focus on a specific people group?
Greeks and Jews, right?
People of Nineveh, or yeah, Greeks and Jews, Gentiles. But Gentiles is I don't know if that might be like a mix of people.
Yeah. I think we mentioned barbarians and Scythians before. But I was just gonna say like it's good you brought up like what is a church? Uh I just I just bought a documentary. I just was watching it right before you guys called me. It's called The Church, and it's so far so good. It's it's a pretty good you know it's talking about the apostolic ministry of the church, and I think I'm on this part where they're talking about the foundation, and uh the foundation is laid just once. Doesn't need to be laid over and over again. And whatever we had from the apostolic teaching, we are now just like, because the guy was saying, what is it? Themelios is the Greek word for foundation. I didn't take Greek, so I'm just taking it from him. And then the Greek word that was used for like churches and congregations later was like pillars. So like, we're just building upon what was laid by Christ and the apostles. So what the church is, it's the assembly of God's people. And whether that be a cultural homogeneity, yeah, a homogeneous group of people or a bunch of different people, however that manifests itself, regardless of what it is, it's one new man. It's one uh it's it's uh it's one new man in Christ. It's the bride. I think that that's the more important thing about church. That's the most important thing, that it's, you know, that it belongs to Christ, and that it's in the world but not of the world. And regardless of what it looks like to the world, it's it's a specific thing to Jesus. And I think that that should probably be the more the focus of what a church should be called, like should be made up of, rather than ethnic diversity. Like I mean, I remember we talked about like I don't think we should do like I'm not under the conviction that we should do like affirmative action in the church. Like you have to have this many brown, black, and you know uh, this many elders in your elder board. Like it's not prescribed. It in scripture, it's not really taught. Although the church is made up of all these different peoples and cultures, that's a wonderful thing to see. But it's something that is just it's just part of what makes up a church. It's not the thing that makes it. This is a cool podcast. I'd follow.
We're talking about a Filipino American ministry
That's cool, man. I'm cool with that.
called FAM. Are you FAM?
Fam, man.
FAM, I understand FAM as Founders Alliance member, but that's because I
Not dude.
follow Founders Ministries. But FAM, I'm totally down with that. I mean, I love that, that God made us the way we are. I don't, I don't despise that. It would be bad for someone to say, it's bad that God made me this way. I don't want people to think that, where they think they're a certain color of skin and therefore not desirable or not not good enough or something like that. Even in the Philippines, the way like bleaching products are sold, it's like to make you whiter. So I mean, I don't want people to think that like God made us in He made us. Yeah, we were fearfully and wonderfully made, and we are made for His glory in all these different ways. And if that manifests itself in whatever church you're in, you have Filipinos. Filipinos are everywhere, man. It's not just in America. Like it's everywhere. Like my one of the guys who's at my church now, he's a pastor from Shanghai. He said there were Filipinos in his church in Shanghai. They'd always show up late, but that's besides the point. So, like we're everywhere, and I think that's just cool about our culture, our community.
There's this joke that there's a question like, what are the two things that you find everywhere in the world?
Filipinos.
Potatoes and Filipinos.
I was gonna say dumplings. Every culture has a dumpling, you know?
But anyways, I think this kind of leads us though to another question.
Yeah, wait, I was gonna say something about Neo's thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I think the question, is it unbiblical to be a Filipino American church? I think it is possible. Like with any, yeah, I think there is times when it is unbiblical, and I think the common one is when they're centered around a certain ethnicity, um, and it has that bias to become unbiblical because, or it has that temptation to become unbiblical because of that, what you've mentioned, Neo, that sometimes, or a lot of times maybe, Filipino American churches become more uh, cultural groups, or like social clubs,
Social
cultural
clubs.
club.
Yeah.
Yeah, they become more of like a Filipino community center rather than it actually being centered on the gospel, centered on Christ. And there's this phrase that I heard. It's called the culture gospel swap, where it was coined. Yeah, it was coined by this pastor. I forgot his name, but yeah. Anyways, he was saying that we attract people to our church through the culture, and then we have like this bait and switch where now we bring in the gospel, and then because they have no other community, because they are looking for people who are like them, they have no choice but to stay, and then they say yes, we'll join your church, we'll get baptized, etc., but they're not really called to actually believe in the gospel. So I think, yeah, in summary, if the church is like I think every Filipino American church needs to watch out for that, where they need to make sure that their church is not just a Filipino club, but it's actually, seeing how I think the best way for a Filipino American church is seeing how does the gospel speak to my Filipino American identity, and how can I empower other Filipino Americans to um, reach other ethnicities and other people that they're interacting with.
That link I sent you about Nine Marks writing that new article they wrote about Asian American church, or
Jeremy Young is
the
his name,
state
by the
of the
way.
immigrant churches. If you go down to the bottom, they actually have another article related to it called, I think, like, make sure they're not just immigrants but Christians,
Oh yeah, yeah.
something like that. I think. But yeah, I think Neil, you might be interested in that. They're writing a new series of articles, Nine Marks,
It's interesting. I
on
mean,
uh,
I,
on immigrant
I
churches.
I haven't been following Nine Marks as much recently, but I should look into that actually. The articles you're talking about. Send them to me. I think they have a writer who was actually a Filipino pastor.
Yeah, I think the writers for this one are like mostly Asian Americans.
Yeah. So I remember seeing articles by a Filipino guy, and I was like, because I saw his last name, and I was like, oh, that guy's got to be Filipino. Like it's one
Yeah,
of the
I think that would be great because like a lot of the struggles or the thinking that's happening, I at least from what I see, with regards to Asian American churches are in like Korean or Chinese churches. Not I don't see much like um, ideas, so, exchange of ideas in the Filipino pastors.
it's weird too. Like when you think about Asian cultures in general, like like um like I was asking my Chinese friend if he was going to send his Chinese kid or his kids to Chinese school, right? Because he's from Hong Kong, his wife is from Singapore, and then like they're friends at my church. Like me and Brian, actually, we were supposed to pray tonight, but his son got busy. Anyways, we, I was asking him if he was going to send his kids to Chinese school, and he was like, I want to, but it's just it's not feasible, you know. But I know other parents who are like, yeah, we'll send our kids to Chinese school or like, you know, stuff like that. Um, like Filipinos, I don't, you don't have Filipino school, you know? Yeah, you don't have anything like that. I feel like Korean and Chinese culture is like very strong. So even if you are an immigrant, you understand like you keep some cultural heritage and it's a strong one. For the Filipino, I think it's more like assimilation to whatever culture you're in, which is why Filipinos are able to like be everywhere. One of the reasons I think is like we can work anywhere, um, and we go into the culture and we're there. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But like maybe that's one of the things about the Filipino church is it's not hard to have those like tensions that are like in the Korean or Chinese churches. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not maybe it's not like on that level because of how Filipinos assimilate in a different way. I don't know if that has any bearing on um, like what we're talking about, but it was just something I was thinking about. Yeah.
No, I mean it might. Like I think Asian American churches, they have their own, like, you know, different Asian Americans have their own struggles, right? Like Filipinos in general, at least from my experience, I don't know the statistics for it, but most Filipino American immigrants who come to the US are able to communicate in English, right? I mean, there are some who don't. Nosebleed, nosebleed. I don't understand English, or I don't want to speak in English, or, you know, I mean, I definitely had my first year in the U.S. where I'm still thinking of the response, and you know, people who speak English are already like talking about the next subject, so I couldn't communicate because it was very hard for me to like think fast enough to know what to say, right? Like I understood it, but for me to communicate, like to have a conversation, it was very difficult. And for some people that takes longer. Like I know someone at my church, they've been here for 3 years and still very difficult for this person to like communicate, right, when it's like English. So but you know, that might be on him. And I think in general though, like just it, most Filipino Americans do try, and they do speak English. But yeah, I think Filipino Americans in general, we have our, like, if it was like level of difficulty, I suppose for us it's not as hard as compared to like an immigrant church that really do not understand English and don't speak English. Like I feel like that's, yeah, that's hard, but still it doesn't, I don't want to minimize. I think there is still a difference um,
Yeah.
that is enough to uh, warrant like a Filipino American church, I think.
Yeah, I think definitely when I went to KCM, my campus ministry, I could see the difference. I could see the similarities between our church experience, but it was my first time to hear about English ministry
Yeah.
because in Filipino American churches, everything is in English except for the fellowship.
Except for the
But
film.
the in the other churches, they had a Mandarin service, they had a Cantonese service, they had an English ministry, and then Koreans they had KM, EM, Korean ministry, Korean church, English church. So I think, and also I had friends. Like I would go eat lunch with their friends and their parents, and the kids would order food for their parents in English, and it was just like we would just be at Chipotle, and then my Korean friend he ordered for his he would ask his dad what he wanted, and he would just order the food for his dad because his dad was so he didn't speak English that much, so he had to order for his dad. So I can see how like if he's in a church too, how valuable the Korean ministry is and how valuable Mandarin Cantonese ministry is. So I think, like Aaron said, like there's that. um, there is that the Filipino American church has more of an advantage to become more welcoming and also to assimilate because
Yeah,
they already
assimilate
speak
faster
English.
maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, they assimilate faster.
speaking English definitely helps that process.
Yeah, and I think also because American culture has been a big part of Filipino culture too. So like they know, uh, yeah, they're aware of like different American pop culture. Like my parents, they were in the Philippines, but they know like ABBA and like what else,
Dancing Queen.
Dancing Queen.
Oh my
As
god.
soon
So
as
like
you
they
said
already
it,
have.
I heard the piano roll in my head.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
So they still, so it's easier. I guess it's easier for them to assimilate, especially in American context, because they already have that influence from American culture before.
Mhm. I mean, like I'm just thinking eschatologically. There won't be like it'll just all be together, right? We'll all just all be together. Um, although there are languages now, there's a I was listening to a pastor talk about this. He was saying that in Babel, the unity was a unity of rebellion against God, and the judgment was that God scattered them in a way that they wouldn't be able to unite in a meaningful way like that again. So the languages kind of separate, and geographically people are separated. But what Christ does through the gospel, he's bringing people together, uh, and then we'll see the consummation of that, on the day of Christ. That the disunity that God, made, he's going to make a unity that can't be broken. Just like the disunity that can't be broken now, he's going to make a unity that can't be broken throughout eternity. Uh, and we have that now in the present, in part, and we experience that in church. We have that unity now, even as we live like unity in the bond of the Spirit, right? But there's that language thing still. So we like the gospel still needs to be understood in the language, which is why I understand all those contextualizations. But the yeah, the Filipino church is just everything's in English. But I do understand your point. There is still enough I cultural stuff to make it a contextualized ministry. That's what you're saying, right, Aaron?
Ah, that was Henrik. Oh
Oh,
yeah, I was saying that too, but um,
oh,
yeah, I maybe I should also say I was telling Henrik earlier that I think that um, it's important to understand that when you focus on a specific people group, it doesn't necessarily mean it's. I'm not like saying we should be against multi-ethnic or like a community church or to all the nations. I think that um, there is a place for reaching a specific people group. I think God has a heart for specific people groups as well as we should reach all the nations. Yes, the way that I see it is that in reaching out a specific people group, the one that I'm already a part of and I'm familiar with, I'm helping reach all the nations by reaching that specific people group. Now again, like Henrik said, it can become sinful if like your meeting is based on your ethnicity alone, right? I mean, that's not why we meet. But
or if the unity you're building upon is premised upon that.
yeah, but I think it's wise to look at it, and I think I mentioned this to you before. It's wise to kind of use that culture as a way to reach people because you already know it, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to like broadly say, I'm gonna reach Houston, or like I'm gonna reach America. Like, okay, well, like, what's the plan? Like, what's the strategy? You gotta start somewhere, right? Like, you can't just say like I'm gonna go to Romania or like I'm gonna go to the Philippines. If you were, for example, like a missionary, you would probably say, okay, I'm gonna pick this people group. I'm gonna study their language. I'm gonna study their culture. I'm gonna live with them so I understand them, and I'm gonna reach out to them. And I think like in the U.S., right, like there is enough gap between majority culture and like Filipino American culture that there is a place for Filipino American Christians to do the reaching out, where it's a wiser use of resources and time.
Yeah, and I think another example of that is like college ministries. Their strategy, I guess, is to focus on college students. So in terms of strategy, you're focusing on a certain people group, um, but your vision is not just those people, but um, yeah, for all nations.
All right, I'm gonna switch the questions a little bit, and then so what are the advantages and benefits of a multi-ethnic church, and flip side is disadvantages and downfalls of a multi-ethnic church? Henrik, want to take this one?
Well, I think the advantage is seeing like unity and diversity. Like you can see how it kind of. I think what I've read before. I read a Nine Marks article about this. It was saying how when the church see when non Christians see churches that are diverse, it shows that there's something that unifies them that is not ethnic focused. So they're centered around something, and that something can cross cultural barriers, and so it's a testament. But if we don't have multi ethnic churches and everything is just mono ethnic, what does that say to the world? It says that we're not really we're just like the world in that we only stick with people who are like us. So I think that's the advantage of multi-ethnic churches. And I think another advantage is being able to reach out to your coworker. Like I have coworkers who are not Filipino, and it would just be easy for me to invite them to my church if it's a multi-ethnic church. And I couldn't do that with a Filipino church because they would feel like a sore thumb. They would feel that they don't belong. But if it's a multi-ethnic church, they see different ethnicities, so they feel like it's like another typical American setting. Like in schools, they have different ethnicities there, and so if you're in a multi-ethnic church, it kind of has that sense of it's American when it's a mixture of different ethnicities, and just seeing the beauty of different how people of different cultures worship God. I think that's another value. Like if you're always in your same culture, if you're always in your same church, you don't get to see how do Black people worship God, or how do white people or Hispanics, how do they worship God? What do they value, and things like that. So in a multi-ethnic church, you can learn different kinds of stories that are not similar to your own. Um, yeah. So I think that's where I would start.
Man, that's like a full page answer.
It was a good answer.
I I think for me, I'm just gonna look at it in one angle, right? Like I would look at the question in relation to immigrants. Uh, it kind of reminded me of what we were talking about, how like Asians who go to immigrants, Christians who go to the D4G conference, it feels more like a going to Jurassic Park, where you go and watch your favorite preacher.
Dinosaur.
Yeah, that dinosaur. But yeah, um,
Have you
anyways,
been at T4G?
no,
Have,
we've been
have
to
you been at,
Epic.
yeah, you've been at, yeah, which was a contextualized ministry. What did you go to TGC at all?
No, I did. I got the opportunity to go and help out, but in the one in the West Coast, but I didn't. I didn't get to. Too busy with school.
Hmm.
I went to the National Apologetics Conference in North Carolina, and yeah, there were not many Asians there, but uh, but I'm okay with that.
I went to TGC 2015. Sounds crazy saying it. It's like, well, it doesn't sound as crazy as Warp Tour 2004. So Warp Tour '04 was a long time ago. Anyways, I can't remember if, I don't know if I was paying attention to how many white people or black people or Asian people I saw or like Hispanic people. I wasn't keeping, it wasn't like something that I was actively uh, engaged with in my mind. Uh, I think I was just there, just because like it was just good to be in fellowship with people who are there for the gospel. Um, yeah, I think I agree with like Henrik's answer. Like there is a benefit to a watching world, seeing uh, like a unity that's you know one guy from Epic. I remember one year I went. He said that um, it was like one of the MCs, right? And it was just a quick comment before like one of the evening sessions. He said, "Yeah, it's great because we have a unity that it's like we're a family and where it runs deeper than blood." And I was like,
Isn't
"Oh,
Epic more like Asian Americans?
yeah, yeah, it is. It's like all yeah." So like I saw a lot of Chinese people and then like a lot of Korean people, but he said like the unity that Christians have is it runs deeper than blood. It's the blood of Jesus, and I totally agreed with him. Uh, so you know you can see that in in that kind of situation. You have just all these people who are gathered together. They wouldn't be in unity with each other for any other reason other than Jesus. If it was not for what Jesus has done for them and for the other people that they're with, for the church, for the family, the flock. Uh, yeah, I always think of contextualized stuff in languages. That's just me.
Yeah, I don't remember where I read this. It's like my friend's friend wrote a blog about how actually difficult it is. So I don't know if this is a disadvantage, but more of like a difficulty, I guess. So this person was just writing about how actually difficult it is to have a true multi-ethnic, multicultural church. Because like I think he was talking about like how in his church, like they have people who are like vegetarians and they have people who believe that like you should like only eat steak or um, uh, basically he was just making the point that like when they do have like fellowship, it's hard to figure out like okay, what are they gonna do, like where are they gonna eat, and like it's just difficult, especially like like people who are preaching there. You don't want to like offend the environmentalist who's like in your church, like it's so diverse, right? Like you have like this was like a church in California, so it's like you have all these sorts of different people walking in and have different beliefs, and so like just making a silly example about the environment might offend somebody. So so it's like um it's beautiful when it works out, right? Like that when everybody puts Christ before their differences. But the reality is there is some difficulty with it, and maybe I guess that's where like it's a good thing when we actually see it working. It's beautiful. But I think a lot of people don't really understand, right? When they aim for like what is that, multi-ethnicity, the kind of grace and understanding that you have to be able to show, especially if it's like a different culture, right? Like if there's actually like, what if there's like truly uh, not like a Filipino American, but like Filipino in your church, and like a true Korean, not like Korean American, and like a Sudanese, right? Like you have to like learn their culture. You have to understand who they are, what's offensive to them, right? Like just so that you could actually share the gospel. It's not as easy as like, oh yeah, come here and eat pizza, but the person doesn't like eat um, or come here and eat pork or something, but that person doesn't eat pork, or you know what I mean? Like there's actual difficulty that some people don't understand, and I think we probably are not talking about like the extreme of like multi-ethnic where there is like these. We're probably just talking about like multi-ethnic in the sense that like people who belong in your community. But I was just trying to give that extreme example.
Hmm.
Well, I would probably offend an environmentalist too. So.
Yeah.
But isn't that what the gospel is? It's a rock of offense, a stone of
That's
stumbling for
right.
people, and it's foolishness to those who don't believe. But God saves all sorts of people, and
Yeah.
uh, it just happens sometimes. People just walk through the doors of churches sometimes, especially in this season.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just sitting down with my elders uh, earlier in the week, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, we had a Muslim and a Roman Catholic come in to church just because they wanted to do something spiritual, and their church, like their places of worship were closed, right? Well, the Catholic church was closed, and I think
Yeah.
the person who came with the Muslim, I think they're in a dating relationship. They met on Bumble. I didn't even know that was a dating app, but they met on Bumble. They came to our church. I was like, what is going on? But that's what the Lord is doing. Like God just brings people in,
Yeah.
and if they sit under the preaching of the word, like you
Yeah.
don't know what God's word will do. You
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
faithful.
No, I think you're. I mean, I'm not saying again that it's a disadvantage of multi-ethnic church, but I'm just pointing out that sometimes we don't know. I mean, we don't realize the kind of sacrifice we have to make to have that multi-ethnic church.
Are you thinking in line of like Paul? Like I
Yeah,
became like
like
all
to,
things for these people.
yeah, like I imagine if I truly have a multi-ethnic church, I have to like know them, know their culture, like um right, like if it's a Filipino, I already know like I gotta get whatever food they give me or else it's offensive. You know what I mean, like little things like those. Obviously,
Hmm.
Or you got to fight over the check a couple times and then you settle.
yeah, yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is like it takes work to truly have a multi-ethnic church.
I mean, it's going to take work, in whichever situation it is. It's
Yeah,
gospel work,
yeah,
and it's we're laborers. Laborers are few, but there's a lot of work to do, and it's
yeah.
plowing the hearts of people, whether they're in your cultural context or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard work, regardless. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think in relation to what Aaron said about knowing your church, I think that that's something that we need to do more of. Is we need to seek to understand other people's cultures more. I could think very often people will say that this church is unbiblical because of they don't agree with their way of doing church. But I think, for example, you think about missionaries when they go to another culture and they share the gospel, and then their church naturally rises. You have to like kind of like make sure you're not bringing your American Christianity to them. You have to make sure that what you're giving them is pure, just Christianity. And then it's kind of like what happened with Paul. Some Christians were thinking, do we have to make them Jews first and then make them be
Yeah,
Christian? But Paul was saying, no, we should just make them be Christian, and we don't have to make them follow my Jewish customs to be Christian. So likewise with missionaries and also with multi-ethnic scenario situations, you don't want to have your congregation and then you're you're unknowingly making them conform to your cultural expression of Christianity. So you have to be aware of your cultural bias, or not bias, but your culture, the way you do church, the way you what values you have as your in your culture, and you also have to be aware of what their values are. And just to give a simple example, is like time. How do perception of time? Like if you're in a multi-ethnic setting, there's gonna be that
Yeah.
struggle with colored people time, where the white people will come on
CPT.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you say? PPT?
CPT.
Oh yeah, CPT. So
What's
yeah,
that?
kind of
Colored people
colored
time.
people time. Yeah. So like,
So wrong.
yeah,
Oh
yeah. So
man.
so like if you're a white pastor, you can kind of feel like, oh, they're disrespecting me because they're not coming on time. But then if you're more aware of their culture, then
That's
you
a
can be
very
more
good example.
understanding. Yeah.
That's a very good example. All
Yeah. So I
right.
think that's where it starts with multi-ethnic churches. They need to learn how to understand each other's cultures.
All right. So we've reached the hour. I think it's about time to end. So Henrik, make your spiel.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I can close it. Yeah. Anyways, thanks guys for watching or listening. If you're listening on our podcast stream, or you're watching on YouTube or any of our social media, thank you for listening. We hope you listen to our next episode. And thank you to our guest, Neo, for coming in and being our first guest.